a young mother disappears into the night. The 27-year-old Alicia Marie Rowley City left her house in Hatfield, leaving behind an eerie message. She was crying and begging for a callback. Her family was desperate, and her children kept asking where their mother was. Investigators searched for answers, but with each passing hour, the chances of finding Alicia alive grew slimmer and slimmer. Just when it seemed the case had hit a dead end, a dive team found the weapon. Hatfield, Wisconsin, is a quiet, beautiful town surrounded by pines and waterways. Deer hunters like to hunt there, and there are very few residents. In winter, only 50 people live there, so everyone knows everyone. The town seemed close-knit and friendly, but on November 19, 2008, a terrible story shook the residents. The police received a report about the mysterious disappearance of a woman. Alicia's mother, Sadie, walked through the streets with her other daughter and grandchildren, asking everyone to look at this photo, a photo of her daughter, their sister, their mother. Everyone was shocked. Alicia had 2 sons, and they missed her dearly. Tracy Rowley tried to be strong, but it was hard for her without her big sister. Alicia was her rock, and she always turned to her in times of need. Although Tracy was very scared, she refused even to think that something bad might have happened to her sister. When Tracy was on the news, all she could think about was that Alicia's abductor had to know she had a family who loved her. Ducky, the husband of the missing young woman, hugged his 2 children and set out to search for their mother. The boys approached everyone involved in the search, asking them to bring their mother home. Their aunt still remembers promising them that she would definitely return. In 2008, Tracy and Alicia were studying nursing. Previously, Alicia had been in the Air Force for several years. She had always dreamed of something bigger, but was homesick and eventually returned. Alicia worked 2 jobs while studying at the same time. When they found out they were expecting twin sons, Alicia and her husband Duck were, of course, surprised but happy. They were a wonderful family, and nothing indicated any problems. On Saturday, November 8, 2008, Duck called Tracy and asked where Alicia was. It turned out she hadn't come home that evening. Tracy knew that Alicia had gone to a friend's house after a fight with her husband and told Duck that she would look for her. She called her sister's friend and asked if she had seen Alicia, but she said she hadn't. As the woman explained, she wasn't worried at that time, but told Tracy they would look for her together. That evening, the young woman didn't show up for work. Alicia had never missed a shift, so everyone was more than a little worried. On Saturday evening, Alicia's husband, Sadie Duck, reported his wife's disappearance to the police. The officer who took the report was friends with Duck, and since Alicia worked nearby as a bartender, he knew her too, so the man wanted to do everything possible to find her as quickly as possible. Duck was the first suspect because he was the last person to have seen Alicia, but they lived in a small town, and the police didn't want to suspect an innocent person. So they drove to Duck's house to talk to him. So she's been missing since Friday, right? Yes. Tell me what happened. Duck told about a friend from Illinois who came here for a hunting trip. He and his friend, Jackson Simmons, spent the evening at a bar and then drove to Duck's house. Alicia stayed all day with her friend Natalie and then went home with the children. When did she come back? Around 9 p.m. The children were with her? Yes, we put them to bed together. She was angry because we had argued. Duck said they had argued about his son from a previous marriage. The man said that Alicia didn't want to see him. She couldn't stand his presence. But he's not a bad kid, mind you. It's just about her. She said she couldn't accept him. He's not her son. He admitted to the officers that they had fought and that he had thrown away Alicia's keys. I threw the keys into the yard, so she couldn't drive anymore. But he hadn't expected her to leave the house on foot. 20 minutes later, Duck looked for her. How long did you search for her? 20 minutes. It doesn't take long to walk around the area. I went to the bars. His alibi was that his friend Jackson spent the night with them. Your buddy was with you the whole time? Yes. Where is he now? In Chicago. He went home. The officers got Jackson's number and left him a voicemail. At that point, Duck's story wasn't suspicious to the officers. They then decided to check Alicia's call list. The last time she used her cell phone was on Friday at 9:30 p.m. She called her friend Natalie, and the officers decided to meet with her. According to her call list, she called you at 9:30 p.m. I didn't hear it. I must have turned it off when I went to bed. The next morning, Natalie listened to the message. She was crying and asked me to call her back as soon as I got the message. Natalie called back immediately, but she only got the answering machine. Not 2 minutes later, I got a call from Duck. I picked up, and he immediately asked me where Alicia was. I thought she had gone home. Duck said they had fought, and she had left the house, and then he cried. Natalie said there were often fights in the family. After every fight, she left the house and called me, crying. And every time, Alicia said she was fine and was sitting in the Bierman bar, as she always did. The Bierman bar was near the family's house. The police immediately wondered if Alicia might have left her husband. Could she have gone to someone else? The officers asked the bar owner if anyone had seen Alicia that evening. He said she hadn't been in the bar. The officers knew that Alicia had walked in the direction of that bar. Maybe someone had offered her a ride. It's deer hunting season. Hundreds of people from all over the state come to Hatfield to hunt. An attractive, drunk woman walking along the road late at night could very well have been picked up by someone, voluntarily or against her will. On Friday evening, around 9 p.m., the 27-year-old Alicia City left her house in Hatfield and disappeared without a trace. The case became the main topic of all conversations. Reporters visited the City family home to talk to Duck. Alicia's husband sat on the couch with the children, answered their childish questions, and at the same time asked them not to give up the search for their mother. Duck promised his sons that their mother would definitely be found and that everything would be fine. Alicia always remained calm when something went wrong, and Duck behaved the same way. Maybe that's why she loved him. They met in 2004. Duck walked into the bar where she worked. He was 13 years older than her and had his own business. Alicia immediately knew she had found her man. Their relationship quickly became serious. They went fishing and hunting together. Alicia always looked at him with a special smile. Duck wasn't a perfect man, but she loved him. They were really very happy. On Sunday, November 9th, the officers called investigator Moan and asked for his help. Moan had dogs trained to track people by their scent. The investigator took Alicia's coat from Duck and gave it to his dog, Clyde, to smell. The dog immediately picked up the trail and led Moan away from the street. They crossed the road, and Clyde ran towards the train tracks. They reached the cliff. There was about a 20-meter high drop. That seemed strange to everyone because Alicia was afraid of heights. There, Clyde stopped, which meant he had lost the scent. Since the trail had disappeared, the investigators suspected that Alicia might have gotten into someone else's car. On Monday morning, 2 days after the disappearance, the police had their first serious lead. A woman came to the police station and told them that Alicia had been in her auto repair shop 3 months earlier, in August. She had brought her car in for repairs and told what had happened to her car. Alicia had thrown one of the customers out of the bar. He was very drunk, and drunk people don't like to be argued with. The unknown man then began to threaten her. When she went home, Alicia saw what had happened to her car. Broken mirrors, windshield, scratches on the doors, severe damage. The investigators took these threats seriously. They wanted to do everything to find this visitor. It turned out that Alicia had reported the damage to the police. Unfortunately, she hadn't given the man's name. The man could have been anywhere. The officers wanted to find out if he had anything to do with the disappearance. While the police were looking for the man, Alicia's relatives continued their search for her. Friends, relatives, and hundreds of volunteers and police officers combed through all of Hatfield. Alicia had many good friends who all pulled together and joined the efforts. Sergeant Patrick LaBarbera said they had searched all the forests, rivers, and roads with boats, cars, and on foot. There were so many volunteers that it was already a challenge to organize them. Everyone wanted to find her. 200 people came from Milwaukee. Bartenders, casual acquaintances she barely knew. Alicia was a remarkable woman. People who didn't even know her, but knew her sister. All the neighbors came. Everyone tried to help. Alicia could have met with something terrible, but people left their children at home to search for her. That was very brave. Enormous efforts were made, but as the sun set, despair set in. At the end of a very cold third day, no trace of the missing woman could be found. But Alicia's family didn't lose faith. They hoped to find her alive. The police received more than 100 possible leads, and one of them gave everyone hope. Alicia had been seen at Walmart on Saturday, the day after her disappearance. A man who knew the family insisted that it was her. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Then another witness came forward to the police who knew Alicia personally. He had also seen her at Walmart. That meant Alicia was alive after her disappearance and was doing well. On Tuesday, the fourth day after the young woman's disappearance, the police received the surveillance footage from Walmart. They were to review it to find Alicia. They really hoped to see the woman alive, but the officers didn't find Alicia in the video recordings. Still, they hoped she was in the supermarket. But when new witnesses emerged, everything came together. Alicia and her sister looked very similar. And it wasn't Alicia that people saw, but her sister Melissa, who went to Walmart on Saturday. In the meantime, the investigators learned the name of the man who had threatened Alicia after she had thrown him out of the bar. They tracked him down and found out that he had an alibi. At that time, it was already possible to determine where his phone was. The investigators found out that he was not near the city family's house that night. They finally returned to the beginning and didn't know what to do next. The community's pressure on the police grew with each passing hour. With each hour that passed, the chances of finding Alicia alive grew smaller, and the investigators wanted to speak again with those who knew her. They met with her friend Natalie, described their relationship. She and Duck had a lot of problems. She cried a lot and didn't know what to do. It turned out that Alicia often left, came back, and left again because she didn't know if she wanted to be with Duck. She told me she had decided to leave Duck and move in with Jake. At this point, the investigators learned that Alicia had recently been living with another man. This would allow her to save money. He had trouble paying the bills alone, and then they grew closer. He said he loved her. That scared Alicia. After all, she didn't want that at all. So the young woman went back to her husband to try to save their relationship. The officers knew Jake and decided to talk to him as soon as possible. Natalie then remembered the incident from the evening of Alicia's disappearance. She had met Jake at the Sunset Bar. What happened then? Her behavior began to change. She wanted to talk to him. I told her not to go with him. Nothing would happen between them. Stop it. I nipped it in the bud. Jake was definitely worth talking to, and the police paid him a visit. Did you see Alicia on Friday? Did you talk to her? She said she would call me in half an hour. What did you talk about? I told her how I felt. It turned out that Jake really loved Alicia. This may sound strange and offensive, but is she by any chance at your house? No. Well, I'd like to talk to you about what you did that Friday. Where did you go? What did you do? How long were you at the bar? I left at 8 p.m. Where did you go after that? We went to Murphy's Pub. Tracy, Alicia's sister, works there. Then we went to my place. We had John Blackberry and his wife with us, my sister Stacy, and her friend Carmen. Witnesses confirmed seeing Jake with other people. There was no reason to believe he was involved. After talking to Jake, investigator Nichols decided to talk to Duck about his relationship with Alicia. If something happened that night, you have to tell us. Do you understand me? If something happened, you have to tell me. And Duck shared a lot with Tim. I can't think of anything, Tim. I don't even really know. He then said he was under great pressure from Alicia's family. Her father came to me. He dragged me outside and searched me. Her father expected to find traces of a struggle on his body in case Duck had something to do with Alicia's disappearance. And then Duck broke down for the first time. I understand how it looks from the outside. We had a fight. Duck felt that everyone suspected him, and that hurt him. After talking to the man, investigator Nichols called him back for a second conversation with a specialist who conducted a multi-stage voice analysis. This technology is based on the purity of the voice, so they didn't need to measure Duck's blood pressure or put anything on his head. "You fought over your son. Tell me about that." "She couldn't accept my eldest son. That's a difficult subject for me. There was never a good phase between them. He's only 8 years old. That was a sticking point in our relationship. I don't really remember what I said. I was so drunk." "And what happened then?" "She was about to drive. I took her keys and threw them into the yard, hoping that would stop her from driving. That made her really angry, and she walked toward a bar near the house. So I took it easy and went into the house. I hope we could talk about it in the morning." "What do you think about her relationship with Jake? Could he have hurt her?" "I've heard he's a nice guy, and aside from trying to take my wife away from me, maybe he is." "Are you capable of hitting her?" "No, I love her too much." "What do you think happened? Do you think she was abducted or hurt?" "I'd like to believe that she escaped. Times are tough. She couldn't take it anymore and ran away from her problems. That's what I'd like to believe." In this conversation, there was nothing that stood out to the police. There were no inconsistencies in Duck's statements. The conversation with the man was coming to an end, but it would take hours to analyze it. In the meantime, investigator Nichols was on his way to Champaign, Illinois, to verify Duck's alibi and meet with his friend Jackson Simmons. As he drove to his house, he received the results of the voice analysis. The investigator was informed that Duck had nothing to do with it. He had passed the test. Since the investigators were convinced of Duck's innocence, they turned their attention to his friend Jackson Simmons. Jackson was at the City family home on the day Alicia disappeared. The investigators had many questions to which he might know the answers. He was very friendly and helpful. The investigator pointed out that their conversation was being recorded, which didn't bother Jackson. "We went to the Beerman bar and had a beer. I bought a 6-pack of beer to take home. His house is right there, 30 meters away. He said he came home. He was very tired and drunk. We got home around 8:30 p.m. I hadn't slept much the night before and had drunk a lot, so I laid down and fell asleep immediately. It was then about 9 p.m. You didn't hear any shouting outside as they argued?" "No, I slept soundly." His and Duck's statements matched perfectly. He was at the house at the time, asleep, had drunk a lot, and fell asleep on the mattress. Jackson left the house the next morning at 7 a.m. He had shot a deer on Friday and was in a hurry to get back to his wife and child. He claimed he hadn't seen or heard anything. He could hardly be considered a witness. Jackson's statement was too perfect. He chose his words very carefully. He had a clear timeline from Thursday evening when he arrived at the City family's house until his departure. The investigators had never heard anything like it. Jackson had obviously carefully prepared for the conversation, and his story resembled a script. The investigators had a whole series of questions. Had something happened between Jackson and Alicia? Could something have happened between them? He tried his best not to arouse suspicion, but why make such an effort? As a result, Jackson became a suspect. Then a new lead emerged in the Alicia City case. The police found evidence in a body of water east of Black River Falls. On Wednesday, November 12th, 5 days after Alicia's disappearance, the police received a call from a woman in the area. She had decided to take a walk, reached the bridge over Morrison Creek, looked down, and saw a cell phone in the water. A team of investigators rushed to the site. There they found a silver object, which was the same phone as Alicia's. The phone was handed over to the criminal police, who collected all the necessary information. On the same day, the police captain reviewed the last conversation with Duck City. He listened to his statement, then stopped the tape, walked down the corridor, entered the investigator's office, and said, "Something's not right here." The captain had heard something important. "I loved her. She was a good person, a very good person." He spoke of her in the past tense. The captain asked the investigator for his opinion. The investigator said it was a murder. The officers then obtained a search warrant. 6 days after Alicia City's disappearance, the police sealed off the house where she lived with her husband. They searched the house to look for evidence and determine if a crime had taken place. The investigators found several cell phones and determined that the serial number of the phone found in the water matched the serial number on one of the phones found in City's house. After confirming that it was Alicia's phone, the investigators sent a team of divers to thoroughly search the body of water. In the meantime, the search in City's house was not yet finished. Duck's weapons safe was in the garage. He gave the investigators the code without objection. They checked all the weapons and serial numbers, but found an empty gun case. Knowing how meticulous Duck was with his possessions and hunting, the investigators immediately suspected that something was wrong. They wondered if Duck might have made a deal with Jackson Simmons. They listened to Jackson's statement and noted the time when the checks were cashed at the bar. He said he had bought a six-pack of beer and left around 8:30 p.m. However, according to the bar's records, he left at 9:15 p.m. Since the bar is only a few steps from Duck's house, Jackson could have quickly gotten home. Based on Alicia's last call, they believed that something had happened at the City family's house at that time. The investigators decided to speak with Jackson again. He did his best to hide the incident from his wife and family, so the conversation took place in the investigators' car. "We were hoping you could help us understand the situation. We've interviewed a lot of people, and as it turns out, not everything adds up." The investigators found many inconsistencies in his story. If the bartender is right and the cash register matches, you're lying. "I was sleeping, so I didn't know what happened." He had a pen and a notepad in his hand. One of the alarm signals was that he clicked his pen when asked uncomfortable questions. He wasn't aware of it, but the clicking was comparable to a lie detector test. "Are we to believe that you slept peacefully in the house?" "That's hard for me to believe." When the investigators put pressure on him, he started clicking his pen non-stop. "You have a family, a good job. We know we can't find her alive, but we'd like to find Alicia." He trembled. The investigator put his hand on his knee and said, "I know you want to tell me something." And then Jackson broke into tears. Nothing at all. I'm still in shock about what happened. That's all everyone is talking about. I just don't understand how he could get so angry." "What happened that night?" "I went out, and he said he had shot Alicia. He had put a sheet over her." I said, "What happened? What did you do?" The investigator had tears in his eyes. Until that day, Alicia had been reported missing. He said he had to dispose of the body and left. Jackson wanted to pack his things and go back to Illinois, but he found out that Duck had killed Alicia and thought he might do something to their sons. "I thought about the children. I wanted to stay so he wouldn't do anything to them." He was very emotional. He cried, apologized. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you earlier." He was afraid for his family. If Duck could do that to his wife, what would he do to someone who turned him in? Jackson agreed to return to Wisconsin with the investigator as a witness. In the meantime, divers continued to search the river and used the latest technology to solve the mystery of Alicia's disappearance. Searching for clues, they plunged into the mud where visibility was zero, and it was very cold. Their efforts were successful. A team of divers recovered a weapon. The investigators checked the weapon's serial number and found that it was the weapon missing from Duck's safe. So the missing weapon was found. The weapon they found was missing a bullet. After gathering a lot of evidence against Duck, he was summoned again for interrogation. What happened on Friday evening? Initially, his statement didn't change. He said he and Alicia had argued. She said she would take the twins and run away, and I'd never see them again. This time I thought she meant it. She used to talk a lot of nonsense. She behaved badly. I don't remember much anymore. I really don't know. I think I was blind with rage. And then his statement changed. When Alicia turned and left the garage, Duck pulled a weapon from the safe and tucked it into his waistband. We walked toward the house. She turned and said something sarcastic. I pulled my gun and shot her. I couldn't believe I'd shot her. I couldn't believe my eyes when she started to fall. I panicked. Will you take us to the body? Yes. Duck pointed to a spot in the woods. Since the police couldn't find Alicia's body, they used a search dog. At that point, Investigator Mo realized why Clyde hadn't found Alicia's body the last time. It was found that the coat Duck had given the investigators had been worn by another woman. She was a friend of Alicia and had worn that exact coat when she joined the search for her. Clyde had been misled, but investigator Moan didn't make the same mistake. He gave Clyde Alicia's hairbrush and shoes. The dog picked up the scent and set off. After 1.5 kilometers, he stopped, stood in the middle of the road, and then ran towards the woods. The investigators realized that Alicia was there. A search dog helped find her body. Duck City was arrested on charges of murdering his wife. On August 12, 2009, he was brought to trial. The man calmly entered the courtroom without a lawyer and faced the jurors, the grieving parents, sisters, and friends of Alicia City. They all hoped for a life sentence. As a witness who helped in the investigation, Jackson Simmons was not charged. Duck City pleaded guilty to first-degree premeditated murder and was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 35 years. After the trial, everyone wondered what they should tell the now motherless children. Duck had said that he loved his children and would find their mother, even though he knew that would never happen. Shortly thereafter, the boys were taken in by Alicia's relatives. After the murder of Alicia, life in Hatfield Township changed. She was born and raised here. Many knew and loved her. Those who were close to her will mourn her for the rest of their lives. In memory of her sister, Tracy works with victims of domestic violence. She tells them what to watch out for, when they can leave the apartment, and when it's dangerous to stay in the apartment. She wants to share Alicia's light with the world. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves. The naivety of people is sometimes astonishing. Often the worst and bloodiest atrocities could have been prevented, but they were simply ignored. And right now, a man who made dark jokes could be executing a cold-blooded murder plan just because everyone interpreted his remarks as just black humor. Brian Cohey Jr. was born on January 10, 2002, the son of Brian and Terry. He also had a younger brother. The family lived in Grand Junction, Colorado, USA. From a young age, Brian was diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder and attention deficit disorder. Already in middle school, he began to develop antisocial behavior. He became an outsider, often confronting other students and causing them discomfort and aggression. Brian enjoyed humiliating other children and morally destroying them. He was very active on the internet, where his conversation partners became targets for bullying. All this happened both on social networks and at school. Over the years, his behavior worsened. In the yin class, his parents were once again called to school. The principal reported that the other students did not feel safe around Brian, a view shared by the teachers. The teenager constantly teased other students, insulted them in every conceivable way, and escalated conflicts to the point of physical fights. However, his mother and father believed that all this was greatly exaggerated. In 2018, Brian had his first trouble with the law. He was arrested for assault after he hit another student with a homemade weapon, severely injuring him. Following this, the teenager was suspended from school. This happened again in 2019 after he triggered a panic attack in another student who suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. Brian knew exactly what he was doing. He deliberately exposed himself to this risk, but did not think about the consequences for his victim. That same year, he was again suspended when the high school student made inappropriate sexual remarks towards female students. From the onset of these disorders, Brian was obsessed with cruelty and violence, especially with serial killers. His idol was Jeffrey D., and he made no secret of his morbid inclinations. Other students nicknamed him D, and Brian reveled in that. In high school, one of his teachers found a diary in Brian's briefcase in which he kept detailed statistics about various serial killers. He was interested in how many people they killed and what their motives and methods were. He loved black humor and liked to tell bloody jokes. Despite all these disturbing facts, the teachers limited themselves to another call to his parents. Because of Brian's inappropriate behavior, he was transferred to another school for children with special needs. His mother and father thought this would help control their child's aggressive temperament. Previously, however, they had also taken him to a doctor to be examined and to find out how to handle the teenager's deviations. The staff at the medical center immediately realized that he should undergo a thorough examination to detect a possible psychosis. However, this diagnosis was never made as he refused hospitalization and an in-depth examination. He took prescribed medications for ADHD and anxiety, which barely helped him cope with his mental problems, especially during the transition period. Despite his condition and behavior, Brian still had a few friends. It was a small group of teenagers with whom he maintained friendships even after high school. They were all considered outsiders, but no one except Brian was so cruel. After graduating from high school, Brian got a job at a local grocery store. At that time, his parents divorced, and the troubled child stayed with his mother. His father visited him regularly, almost every day. Mother and father maintained a friendly relationship. The woman ran a kindergarten, and the father became self-employed making life jackets. The parents had enough money to support their son, but this had no impact on improving the teenager's condition. On the early morning of February 28, 2001, the police received an unusual call from a boatyard. The father of the 19-year-old Brian worked nearby. The young man had driven his car into the mud at the shore of the Colorado River, and then the vehicle was pulled into the water by a high bank. It fell in and sank a few meters deep. When the police arrived at the accident site, the young man was already there with his parents, as he had previously reported the situation to them. Also at the marina, concerned people were helping the drenched man to warm up. The police officers tried to find out how and why the young man was there at night. According to his statements, he needed privacy and peace, and was therefore looking for a place where he could feel safe and be himself. However, the circumstances of the incident seemed too strange to the police officers. It looked as if Brian had intentionally driven the car backward into the water and then lost traction when he tried to drive away, causing the vehicle to roll into the river. Brian managed to get out of the sinking vehicle, but was completely drenched and risked hypothermia. As it turned out, he had arrived here in the late afternoon and stayed until dawn. It seemed strange that a young man of his age could not engage in anything other than such things. His parents explained to the police officers that he had developmental peculiarities and that it was therefore completely normal for him to be different. Brian wanted to call for help because it was February and cold. He was completely drenched and did not know how to get home. Unfortunately, his mobile phone was turned off. The man reached the street and wanted to get help from passing drivers, but there were no cars. 5 minutes later, a car with a father and his son inside pulled up in front of him. The men gave him a mobile phone with which Brian could call the police and his parents. To keep warm, the two men allowed Brian to sit in the car and gave him moral support. The young man was apparently in a very unpleasant situation and feared possible problems if his parents noticed that he had drowned the car. In fact, this strange accident was more of a laughingstock for the police officers. No one paid much attention to the sunken car. At the same time, Brian's parents sat on the dock, thinking about how they could get the car off the bottom. Brian Sr. operated his own business there, a place he knew well. The man knew that the problem could only be solved with machinery, since the shore was very steep. Unfortunately, it was too early to call a tow truck, and the sun was freezing and at risk of hypothermia. They called several towing companies until they finally found an available vehicle. The whole thing was dismissed as an amusing oddity, and the officers let the family go so that the parents could move and warm up their son. The officers returned to the boat dock to help tow the vehicle. The police officers' laughter turned to concern when the car was on land. They noticed something that looked like blood dripping from the bodywork. The officers immediately called Brian's father. The officers wanted to warn the parents that their son could be injured, as the young man might not have felt the injury due to hypothermia or adrenaline. This precaution seemed appropriate. The vehicle was simply returned to the family. The investigators did not conduct tests or take blood samples. The investigators could not even be sure whether it was blood or another liquid that only looked like it due to the color. As it turned out, Brian was not injured. Everything was dismissed as some kind of accident. But already the next day, on March 1st, law enforcement authorities realized their mistake. A woman named Monique called emergency services, reporting the disappearance of a man named Warren Barnes. She was the owner of a bridal shop near the place where the missing man often took a break. The two had become friends, as the man liked to read very much and often sat at the same spot near her shop. Warren was a homeless man, but pleasant and calm. Monique often talked with him and gave him small jobs so he could earn money for food and water. It turned out that he was quite well known in the city, especially because of his love for reading. Everyone knew him as a friendly, intelligent, and well-read person who was always ready to chat and help. Warren did not tell why he became homeless, but everyone knew he had a difficult fate. On March 1st, Monique reported that she had last seen the man on February 27th around 5 a.m. He usually came before the store opened, chatted with her, drank a coffee, and picked up his assignment for the day. They had arranged to meet the next day, but the missing person did not show up on February 28th. Monique turned to the police because Warren's wallet was found in the boathouse. Inside was the phone number of a woman who was contacted because she wanted to return the wallet. This worried her, of course. Warren had always been responsible and taken his work seriously. When the man helped Monique in the store doing helpful work, he had never been late or missed a day in the 2 years of their cooperation. Only twice had he not appeared, and on those occasions, he had announced his absence in advance. Moreover, the woman found the place where the wallet was found strange because Warren did not own a car and had no reason to drive there. Additionally, the place was far enough away. The drive from his place of residence took about an hour and a half. The woman was immediately concerned about this circumstance and suspected that something bad might have happened to her assistant and friend. She handed the investigators a single photo of Warren that was taken several years before his disappearance. Strangely, the man's wallet was found by Brian Sr., whose business was near the boathouse. Even more amusing was the fact that the wallet was found in his son Brian Jr.'s car shortly after the vehicle was pulled out by a tow truck. When his father asked the teenager about the wallet, the young man confirmed that he had found it at the gas station and wanted to return it to the owner, but had simply forgotten due to the events of the previous day. However, the parents did not believe their son because, in addition to the wallet, they found latex gloves and a large kitchen knife with traces that suspiciously looked like blood stains. They knew of Brian's strange behavior and his tendencies and could not understand why he had taken another's wallet into his car. That afternoon, Brian Jr. wanted to go for a walk to a friend and disappeared. His mother could not get the matter of the wallet and the disappearance of the homeless man out of her mind and decided to rummage around his room. She quickly found something that made her scream in horror. In Brian Jr.'s wardrobe, a human head was found hidden in a large plastic bag. Next to it was another similar bag, but the woman simply did not have the strength to open them and explore the contents. She just took both bags and placed them in the kitchen sink before calling her ex-husband. The woman was sure that her son had killed the man. The parents called Brian and asked him to come home immediately. They remained calm and did not want to talk about what they had found in his room. His father said he needed to get the keys for the drowned car, and the young man, who knew nothing, left the house. As he was in the family's driveway, several police cars had already driven into the driveway. They arrived quickly and caught the young man on the street in front of the house. Brian was immediately asked why his parents might be concerned and why they would call the police. The boy casually replied that they had probably found a severed human head and hands in his wardrobe. He then calmly confessed to the murder. Brian Jr. did not resist and cooperated willingly with the investigation. He voluntarily got into the police officer's car and drove to the interrogation at the station. They did not even put handcuffs on him. He appeared generally cheerful and seemed satisfied with the situation. While Brian was very calm, His mother was hysterical. The ex-husband did his best to calm the grieving woman. The parents were just trying to come to terms with the fact that their son was now a murderer. After Brian was driven to the station, one of the investigators stayed to talk with the man's parents. They recounted the events of the last 24 hours of their lives, the situation with the car and the wallet. According to the father, the mother simply did not believe her son's version about the wallet. So she decided to search his room in the hope of finding something else suspicious and figuring out how something like blood could be on the bodywork. She had a bad feeling and made a horrifying discovery. According to the man, he was the one who found the wallet in the car, and inside were Warren's ID and Monique's phone number. The man immediately called the woman, who was an acquaintance of the missing man and who could return the wallet to the owner. At that point, he learned that Warren had not shown up for work and was being sought. Consequently, his son denied any frightening suspicion of his parents. They talked to him, but he dismissed it with various excuses. During the interrogation, Brian Jr. behaved extremely calmly, so the police began to question him with the simplest questions to assess his health status, psyche, and past experiences. For an ordinary criminal without mental problems, he behaved much too calmly. The heinous crime he had committed did not seem to disturb him in the least. He described in great detail what had happened and was even proud or boastful about it. He made jokes the evening of February 27th that he had been in the car and emphasized that he was in a very bad mental state. He heard voices that prompted him to look for a victim. Around 11 p.m., Brian drove under a bridge near the sheriff's office. When he noticed a tarp under which a homeless person was sleeping, he thought that would fit well. Brian stopped, put on 3-layer gloves and a Michael Myers mask, and took a knife. He got out of the car, went over, and tore off the tarp. Then he began to stab the homeless person in the head and neck without warning. His victim was Warren, who tried to defend himself and kept asking why he was doing this. Brian did not listen to him and dealt him blow after blow. According to his own calculations, he must have inflicted 30 to 40 stab wounds on his body before he stopped. The murderer repeated a phrase like a mantra, dirty, stinking, really disgusted by his victim. When the massacre was over, the man showed no signs of life. Brian reported that he was sweating, but was surprised how easy it was to kill a man. When he finished the execution, the victim's head was almost detached from the body. Then he decided to look at the internal organs and open the abdomen. In the next phase, he separated the hands and beheaded Warren. Finally, after previously giving him a so-called Glasgow smile by cutting his mouth from ear to ear, he did so, but this was only part of the mutilations that posthumously disfigured the deceased. Brian could not even list the ways he mutilated the body of an innocent man after having had his fun. The perpetrator took photos of the corpse and the crime scene, which were later deleted from his mobile phone. Experts were able to recover these images. The horrific details of the senseless execution were revealed. Then he cut out his victim's eyes, separated the hands from the body, and placed them in a bag. The head was also placed in an identical sack. He put everything in the trunk of his car and drove home. There, Brian cleaned the trophies into the wardrobe, cleaned the knife, and washed his clothes. According to the man's confession, he made animal noises during the massacre and growled later. Many people from his environment later confirmed that they had repeatedly observed such behavior in the perpetrator. Brian emphasized that he felt no remorse or pity, which was a clear expression of his indifference. He was even proud of his act, as he could join his idols. Most of the interrogation time, the young man smiled broadly. The investigators were shocked by the details of the crime and the joy with which Brian described everything. It seemed as if he wanted to remember every detail of the murder to immortalize himself as a madman. He even drew a rough map of the bridge and the crime scene from a bird's-eye view. Eventually, the investigators realized that he was simply reliving the moment of the murder in this way, which gave him great pleasure. According to Brian, he intended to hide the head in a paint bucket and throw it away, and also get rid of the hands in another part of the city, but he had no time. The murderer admitted that he was paranoid and therefore noticed that he had torn one of his gloves during the attack, but this only became apparent to him later. The man did not want to be caught, so he returned to the crime scene to recover the body. With him, he drove to the coast to the boat dock, but after he threw Warren into the water, he could no longer drive away. His car skidded on the wet ground and crashed into the river, so he had to call for help. After the crime was reported, the young man's car was examined more thoroughly, and the police found much more blood traces than originally assumed. However, this evidence was no longer as important since the investigations had the severed body parts of the deceased and the murderer's confession, which were recorded and documented. During the entire interrogation, Brian not only smiled, but constantly made gruesome jokes about his victim. His parents had often heard such humorous sketches from their son, but never suspected that he was actually capable of such things. His mother knew of the young man's fascination with serial killers, but did not take this attraction seriously. Although Brian was obsessed with them and considered them idols, she even gave him a book about the work of criminologists and murder investigations in the hope that it would help channel his morbid desires in a constructive direction. She hoped that instead of just being fascinated by serial killers, he could become a successful investigator. But unfortunately, her plan did not work and only helped him prepare to kill a homeless man. After the interrogation, the police spoke with Brian's girlfriend, with whom he had spent time on the day of his arrest. Her name was Keelan. She had been in contact with the arrested person since 9th grade and described him as a very closed person who liked to make provocative jokes and had a pronounced sense of black humor. Shortly before the act, Brian even confessed to her that he wanted to kill a homeless person because no one would look for such a person. But this was, as always, taken as another joke. The same group of Brian's friends found themselves among outsiders. They did not fit into society, so they formed their own little meeting point where everyone felt comfortable. At the same time, the other members of this group never took his murder thoughts seriously despite their shared love for black humor. No one except Brian would kill people. The boy's parents paid little attention to his behavior at school and even believed that the teachers were deliberately putting him down among the other students. At the same time, one day, a meeting with the teachers took place at school who were very worried about the safety of the students and themselves. They agreed to keep a closer eye on Brian. This happened after he repeatedly expressed his admiration for the cunningness of school shootings. However, no one reported the potential danger emanating from the teenager. When the police came into Brian's diary, in which he kept statistics about serial killers, his criminal plan became clear. The investigators also uncovered his criminal plan. It turned out that he had devised a terrifying plan that involved breaking into a house, killing adults and children, then stealing valuables and leaving the crime scene. He was to use a hunting knife and a .45 caliber revolver. Fortunately, Brian had no more time to carry out his plan. The diary also described the reasons for his belief in natural evil that he had created himself to justify future atrocities. The police were amazed that all these entries had been seen by the school's teachers. His parents and friends knew about it, but no one went to the police and no one insisted on compulsory treatment of the young man. All this led to a bloody massacre. Although the law enforcement authorities possessed Warren's severed body parts, his body was still not found. The search in the water continued, but apparently not intensely enough. The police had enough evidence in their possession, including Brian's confession, to charge him with murder. In conversation with the investigators, Brian admitted that he had been planning the crime for about 6 months. He was well-versed in forensics and knew that homeless people are a high-risk group whose deaths and disappearances are followed with little interest. Brian had even considered leaving the body at the massacre site, but then reconsidered, again thanks to the book his mother had once given him. Brian's assumption that homeless people were treated with less attention proved correct, but an accident got in the way and exposed him. If it had not been the accident in which Brian drowned the car, this could have been the perfect murder. Fortunately, everything turned out well so that he was exposed and a family could be saved from death. The investigators checked the young man's browser data and found that his internet activities had increased significantly in the last year before the massacre, especially his interest in anything related to crime. At the same time, he struggled with his mental problems and read a lot about paranoid and schizoid personality disorders. On February 28th, the day after the murder, he searched for information on how to delete data from an Android phone and how to dispose of biological waste. Brian admitted that he had never been seriously diagnosed, but was sure that he suffered from schizophrenia. He claimed he had delusions and was obsessed with the idea that everyone was watching him, even the birds. Based on these statements, the police were very cautious in dealing with the man because they feared he might try to evade responsibility for his actions by claiming insanity. Brian did not stop at the detailed description of the murder of the man. He confessed that he had killed a cat on Halloween 2018. The man had caught the stray animal, put it in a bag, and mistreated it for a long time, beating and trampling it before killing it. Then Brian beheaded the animal and hid the head in the house. As the remains began to rot and smell foul, he simply threw them away. It was rumored that many people knew about the incident, but Brian did not receive any punishment. During the interrogation, the prisoner simply was not to be stopped. He told one strange story after another. According to him, his parents had found a series of tools in his room shortly before the murder, including hammers, shovels, knives, cable ties, a saw, tape, and ropes. Brian did not hide that all of this was intended to kill people. His mother and father insisted that he get rid of all these items. Otherwise, they would have been forced to go to the police. Even at this point, they still believed that Brian was not capable of committing crimes. According to his diary entries, he had originally intended to find an escort lady to lure, molest, and kill her. He wanted to keep the woman captive and torture her. Brian believed that no one would search for such women and homeless people, but then he changed his mind and chose the second option. Brian claimed that doing evil did not provide him with any sexual satisfaction. When asked about his motive, he said he admired murderers and was fascinated by their acts, that they could take a life, and decided that he was no worse than them and wanted to try. During the investigation, a Reddit account of Brian was discovered where he posted comments about his views and his life philosophy, and about the murders. He philosophized about nothing. None of it seemed as compromising as his narratives, but it left a lasting impression of brutality in the man's mind. In one of the last entries, he regretted the murder but expressed himself as if he was not disturbed by the fact that he had taken an innocent life but that he had been caught. In January 2022, the court ordered that Brian Cohey undergo a psychiatric evaluation. He still did not feel guilty for his act, but was clearly unhappy about his imprisonment and the prospect of spending many decades behind bars. Together with his lawyer, he tried to prove his insanity. Nevertheless, the psychiatrist declared him competent. The prosecution had a solid evidence base in the form of body parts, evidence, and the defendant's confession. The victim's body was never found. During the entire trial, Brian smiled a lot. In the end, he was found guilty of first-degree murder and withholding evidence. Brian was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole and an additional 13 years. The judge who announced the verdict in this case said that this case had been the most cruel and inhumane of his career. Despite the brutality of the tragedy and the senselessness of the murder, the media actively followed the rumors, sparking a wave of outrage against Brian but also support. A woman who was friends with the deceased and supported him erected a small memorial site with books in his memory. Thank you for watching and take care.